Hello and welcome back to another episode of DLC. I'm your host today, Joey, and today we are talking about a psychological horror game that is unlike anything that I think I've played in a very, very long time. The game is Perceptum. It's in its playtest phase in Steam, so this isn't the final edition. But before I get into the game, I would like to give a huge thanks, as always, to our friends over at Game.Press and the publisher and developer of the game, Duck Reaction, for the review copy. It's always appreciated. So what is Perceptum? It's a first-person psychological horror puzzle game that leads very heavily into the perception-based mechanics and environmental manipulation. The playtest gives you a small but very clear slice of what the full game is aiming for and what you can expect. It's something closer to a mind-bending horror experience than a traditional scarefest. You're dropped into a series of surreal moments where the core idea is very simple. What you see isn't always real, and sometimes looking at something makes it real. It's very much in that kind of area of the rules are unclear, figure it out for yourself, which I think is really exciting, but could understand if people could find it frustrating depending on your tolerance for that kind of thing. The game's whole identity revolves around perception as a mechanic. Objects appear and disappear, they change based on your perspective, your focus, and whether you're directly observing them. Now, the playtest is pretty light, I think. It's much more around vibes and unease than explicit storytelling, and you're not given loads of context, which works in its favour because it adds I think it adds to a disorientating dreamlike quality. It feels like you're somewhere you shouldn't be and you have to try and understand rules that are never quite explained to you. The core gameplay loop revolves around manipulating reality through your observation. Think along the lines of looking away from an object to change its position, forcing paths to exist by focusing on them and using that perspective to solve spatial puzzles. It's a lot less about logic in a traditional sense and more about experimenting with the world around you. There was a moment where I turned around to check something behind me, and when I turned back, the entire path has changed. At first, I thought this was scripted, but then it kept happening in slightly different ways, and that's when it clicked with me that the game wasn't just messing with me once, it was the core mechanic of the game, which is a really cool realisation. But it's also very unsettling because you immediately stop trusting what you're seeing. The playtest doesn't hold your hand very much. You're expected to experiment, to fail, and slowly piece together the rules. That can be rewarding, but you'll have moments where you're kind of just wandering around until something works. Perception goes for a realistic style. I think the house that you put in presents a really horror vibe to it, which works in favour of the game. This world has a bit of a liminal space energy. Empty rooms, weird architecture, spaces that feel familiar but wrong. It's a bit uncanny valley, and it's a lot less about the horror in a traditional sense and more about making you feel uncomfortable. And because the mechanics always rely on perception, the visuals in this game are doing a lot of heavy lifting. You start to second guess what's static, you start noticing tiny changes in things that you might normally ignore, and you end up scanning environments constantly. It's a really smart use of a very good art style. The game itself, the perception-based gameplay is genuinely interesting. It creates loads of unease in a horror game without relying on jump scares, which in my opinion is the best kind of horror game. Figuring out the rules of the world feels very satisfying, and the visuals of the game are fantastic. As we always say on DLC, not every game is perfect. In the playtest, it can feel like a lack of guidance can definitely lose you sometimes, and it will definitely make some players scratch their heads. Right now, the game is just a small slice, it's a proof of concept rather than the full experience. But I think the Perceptum playtest is a really promising glimpse of what could be a very clever psychological puzzle game built around a very strong central idea. It's not fully there yet, And it definitely leans a little bit hard into ambiguity, but when it works, it creates one of those moments that will really stick with you. It's got a really good mix of perception-based puzzle games and liminal horror. The game doesn't have a release date yet on Steam, but it's definitely one that I'll be sticking on my wish list and really recommending you give it a go if you get the opportunity to play the playtest. Once again, thanks to our friends over at Game.Press and the developer and publisher Duck Reaction for the review copy of the game. I've been Joey Fitz. God bless, have a great day.